Hi guys, welcome back to Sunday School. Today we are jumping into two new books of the Bible. One is called Nehemiah and one is called Ezra. So who are these guys? Who is Nehemiah? Who is Ezra? Well, let me tell you about what's happening in Israel. Do you remember last week we learned about two kings who one followed God, one didn't follow God? Well, let me tell you that a lot of the kings in Israel did not follow God. And God constantly told them, turn from your wicked ways and turn to me and follow me. Let me help you. Let me be a part of what you're doing here. But Israel didn't want to. They just wanted to do what they wanted to do. And so God got really tired of constantly having to tell them and to try to help them when they wouldn't take any help from him. So God got angry and he said, enough is enough. You guys are not doing this anymore. And I'm going to remove my protection from you. And a different country from very far away, a king is going to come and he's going to demolish this entire nation, and it will be a nation no more. Pretty bad, hey? So that's what happened. This nation called Babylon, maybe you've heard of it before, came from far away and just crushed the city. They took almost all the people back to Babylon, where some of them were slaves, some of them had to work for the king, and they had to go live in Babylon and become a part of Babylon, and they weren't allowed to be Israel anymore. So it's pretty sad for Israel, this special family who God protected and saved over and over, were no more, except for a few stragglers that were left in the city. But the city was a scary place. It had no walls for protection. They had no crops for food. So the people were hungry and they were sad, and it was not a good place to be. Wow, we're starting off on kind of a sad note today. Well, let me tell you about what happened next. Because even though God was giving his family a consequence, he's kind of giving them a big giant timeout. Have you guys ever had a timeout before? Well, this is kind of like a great big timeout for this family, this big nation, Israel. And it was a long timeout. It wasn't just 2 minutes or 5 minutes. It was hundreds of years. Okay, so there's this guy named Nehemiah, and he's living in Babylon. And he is serving the king. He has a special job really close to the king, taking care of his cup to make sure anything that the king drinks is not poisoned by his enemies. So he's pretty close with the king. And actually, this king wasn't too bad of a king. He was actually kind of nice. And so Nehemiah had heard some news about his country, Israel. How bad it was, how people were getting hurt, how there was no walls for protection. And his heart just felt so sad about it. So at his job, he was kind of looking sad. He was feeling sad about it. And he went to God and he fell on his knees and he said, God, help these people. What can we do? And he fasted and he prayed and he cried out to God, what can we do to help Israel? Like, I just feel so sad about this. And so he was sad at his job, and the king noticed, and he said, Nehemiah, what's going on? Why are you feeling so sad? And he explained the situation to the king, and the king felt bad and he wanted to help. So he said, Nehemiah, what can we do to help? How can I help this situation? And so what ended up happening was Nehemiah was sent back to Israel to build up the walls and get some safety for the people that were left there. And the king not only sent Nehemiah, he also sent supplies and people to help build it. So God totally answered Nehemiah's prayer here. And this is the cool part. Even though Israel wasn't listening to God, and he kind of put them in a timeout and he sent them away, and it was really bad for them. And even though God was angry, he still loved the people so much. Nothing they could do would ever stop God from loving them and still taking care of them. So that's the story of Nehemiah, and how he got sent back to Israel to start slowly rebuilding Israel. Because God's hope was to restore Israel. He wasn't going to leave them in Babylon. He wants to bring this word we call restoration. He wants to fix all the broken things. So let's see if we can find Nehemiah in our Bibles. It's in the purple section. So I want you guys to find it, and I want you guys on that front page, I want you guys to draw maybe a picture of a wall or like a castle wall, something to remind you about Nehemiah fixing the walls, because that's what the whole book is about. Now remember I said we're going to talk about 2 people that God had a special job for? So Nehemiah was one of them. The second one was Ezra. Now Ezra's the next book in the Bible. So if you guys want to flip a few pages over, you'll find the book of Ezra. Now who was Ezra? Ezra also lived in Babylon, and his job was a scribe. Does anybody know what a scribe is? That's right. A scribe is writing, someone who wrote things down to remember them. So he was a writer, but he also did a lot of reading. And he read the scrolls that talked about God's ways, basically the Bible of their time, and he knew them. And he knew how important that was, that people followed God and restored the temple and had a place to come and worship and turn their hearts back to God. So this same king who sent Nehemiah back also sent Ezra back with supplies. And get this, when they came and conquered the land and demolished it, they carried all the treasures off from the temple and brought them to Babylon. And this king gave back a bunch of those treasures for Ezra to take back to Israel and to rebuild the temple. And that was also what God wanted, because he wanted the people to have a place to come and to learn about him and to worship him, and so that their hearts could be following God. And he knew that's what they needed. So he sent Ezra back also with this special job. And so just like that, slowly things started to get rebuilt. And slowly God was getting things ready for Israel to return back to a safe place that was set up for them. Now, what does this story tell us about who God is? Well, when I read Ezra and Nehemiah, I think, wow, God, even when he's angry, even when we do things that are just so not good, he still loves us, and he still cares about us, and he still wants to bring us back into relationship with him and into his safe arms and his safe walls. It also tells us that even when things look really bad and it seems like things aren't going good for us, God is with us and he still wants to help us. Now, what does this story tell us about people? What does it tell us about us? What can we learn from this story? Well, it tells us, well, first of all, that God has special jobs for us to do. God had a special job for Nehemiah, he had a special job for Ezra, and he has a special job for you, and he has a special job for me. He wants us to be part of the story. We get to be a part of God's story. Isn't that amazing? It also shows us how much God loves us. So I know you guys have your finger in Ezra, and I want you guys to draw maybe a temple or something that reminds you, a Bible, about how Ezra was restoring the temple in Israel. There you go, guys. We got through 2 books of the Bible today. Awesome job. I'll see you next week.